weekend. Last night I was watching you online.
So it was the same?
Same.
Nothing difference between direct and indirect?
Well, maybe I only got 10%.
Divided into two parts. The first part was finding the essence. Actually, who gets the most mercy from Krishna. That was the theme of the first part, involving a story of Narada Muni going to different persons and asking them if they're the greatest devotee, and they pass them on to another devotee this way. And finally, the gopis are the best devotees. That's the conclusion. So in the second part, Uttara asked the questions, what happens to the people of Vrindavan? Where do they go? Do they go to the spiritual world? If so, do they go to Vaikuntha? Or do they get the same goal as everybody else? Or do they get a special place for themselves? So that's her question. So to answer that, Parikshit tells another story of Gopakumar. And actually it's Gopakumar telling his story to a Brahmana who comes and who got the Krishna mantra but doesn't know what it means, and he's searching around, and then eventually he's told by Shiva to go to Vrindavan. So he goes to Vrindavan, and there he meets Gopakumar, and then Gopakumar begins to tell him his own story of how he began. And then Gopakumar tells how he was a cowherd boy in Vrindavan, just with a material body. Then he met his guru, and his guru gave him the 10-syllable Krishna mantra, and he began chanting that, and he became detached from his family, and he left Vrindavan, and was wandering around at the bank of the Ganga. And the promise of his guru was, you'll see the Lord of the universe. So he was just a little boy, more or less, and he didn't know exactly what that meant, but he was searching around for the Lord of the universe. And then he went to various places, and he became he went to Puri eventually, and then he became the king of Puri. And then he resigned, and he went back to Vrindavan, but then he had a longing for Puri again. And then he heard about going to upper planets, and the Lord was in the upper planets. So by the power of his mantra, he got up to Svargaloka, where Vamana resides with Indra. And then from there, he went higher up to Mahaloka, and from Mahaloka to Janaloka, and Tapaloka, and then Brahmaloka. And in each of these places, he was able to see the Lord in some sort of different form. And then still he was not quite satisfied in one sense. So in this way, he came back again to Earth planet, and then he meditated again, and then he actually began to go through the different layers of the universe up to Shiva Loka, and then he meets Shiva, and then Shiva tells him to go back again to the Earth and to Vrindavan again. So this is when Gopakumar comes back to Vrindavan again. He's already got a spiritual body by the blessings of his mantra. And then here he meets his guru again. And he performs bhakti and chants and whatever, experiences prema. And then the Vishnudutas come. Now, of course, the Vishnudutas have 4 arms, and he has 2 arms. He also has a spiritual body. So they said, well, you should get 4 arms like us. But he doesn't really, he's not attracted to that, so he refuses their offer. But again, he goes up with the Vishnudutas, and he goes through all the different worlds, Svarga, Mahaloka, Janaloka, Abhaloka, Brahmaloka. Then he starts going through the coverings of the universe, which you already saw previously. And in the coverings of the universe, there are actually beings there. There's deities there, and there's persons worshiping the deities. So it's not just matter. It's actually it's full of all sorts of wealth and opulence and beauty, etc. And he went through each of the coverings. And then he got up to Shiva's abode and liberation, etc. And then finally he came to Vaikuntha. So, then the Vishnuduta said you have to wait outside the door. There was, in the city, the gates of the palace, and he had to wait outside, and he was waiting there. So there's a whole description of him waiting there for quite a long time. And then he sees various servants of Vishnu entering into the palace. And because they look like Vishnu, he mistakes them for Vishnu. And he starts praising them, and they say, no, no, and they cover their ears and saying, no, we're the servants of the Lord, etc. And they have various powers. Some of them can transform their bodies into anything. And they transform themselves into trees or birds or animals or whatever like that at will. And then they come back to their form again, and then they go into the palace or whatever like that. So they have all sorts of remarkable powers. And then finally the Vishnudas come back, and they lead him into the various gates of the palace. There's 7 gates on each side, on the east side, the west side, the north side, and the south side, just like in Srirangam. Have you ever been to Srirangam? So in Srirangam there's a big gate in the front, and there's a gate on the back, and there's a gate on the side. But then there's another wall inside that, with the gates on it, and another wall inside that. So like it's a city with 7 walls and 7 gates in the front, on the east and the west and the north, like this. So there were different gates he had to go through, and each of them, and then he saw the Vishnuduta standing at the gate, and he thought they were the Supreme Lord, but they say, no, no, we're not the Supreme Lord. So in this way, gradually he got into the center of the palace. So anyway, why did these Vishnudutas, they had 4 arms, but they could change their form like anything. So the question arises, why would they want to change their form? And it's only because of service to the Lord. For certain pastimes they will do that. They'll actually, they return to their 4-arm form, because that's the usual form that they perform their pastimes in the Lord, or their service with the Lord. So only for the pleasure of the Lord they will take these different forms. So then when he got into the middle of the palace, then he saw the Lord of Vaikuntha, who was sitting on his golden throne with jewels, etc. And when he saw the Lord, he got very excited. The attendants, the servants of the Lord, had told him, you have to be very formal, and you can't go out of control. You have to be very polite and respectful. But he couldn't help himself, and he began crying out, "Oh Gopal, my life and soul!" And he started running towards the Lord to embrace him, very spontaneously. So the people, they stopped him. He wasn't too reverential. But Vishnu was very, very kind to him, and he welcomed the boy. And he said, "I'm most fortunate to meet you here. For so long I've been eager to see you. For so long hope had me dancing like a fool, thinking perhaps in this lifetime, or this, or this, or this lifetime, he'll finally turn his face towards me." So for many lifetimes the Lord had been trying to give him some hints, which he didn't accept, it looks like. And then finally in this lifetime, or that lifetime where he became Gopu Kumar, then what happened is that the Lord himself became the Guru, and he was the one that gave him the 10-syllable Krishna mantra, and that began his whole journey in that lifetime. Of course, it's not that lifetime in one sense, because when he went to the upper planets, then he lived there for a long period of time, and then when he went to Brahmaloka, he got back, it was several, he was there for some time in Brahmaloka, so by the time he got back to the earth planet, several days of Brahma had passed. So he was actually quite old by then. But anyway, Vishnu told him that he was actually taking care of him and guiding him, etc., as his guru, Jayanta. So he was very fortunate. So he was very happy there, but he was also a little discontented because he had a lot of powers, like they had powers. There's something called Sharshti. You have Sarupya, Salokya, and you have Sharshti. Sharshti means you get certain powers, similar to the Lord's powers. And the Vishnudutas, they use their powers sometimes, but he didn't want to use those powers. He didn't want to display power and splendor. And he didn't want to change his form, which was that of a cowherd boy. And this was in contrast with everyone else. They would look at him and they would feel him a little bit strange because he didn't look like them, and he was like a cowherd boy. And therefore he felt a little bit out of place. And then they would chastise, some of them would chastise him. And say, well, you should not address the Lord of Lords like this, because he was got Gopal and things like this, Krishna's names. Don't sing his praises in that way. just recite the standard prayers about his unlimited, most amazing glory. So he would burst out and call the names of the Lord and do kirtan, and they would chastise him and say, you can't do that. You have to, utter prayers in Sanskrit with, formal meter, etc., and be very respectful to him. Yeah? So that was the case of some of the servants there. They would chastise him in this way, which also made him feel uncomfortable. And also he saw that Lord, but it was not actually the same Lord. It was because he was interested in Krishna with the flute and Vrindavan, because that was the subject of his mantra, the form of Krishna. He had a 10-syllable mantra describing Krishna. So the form of Vishnu was kind of like that, but at the same time it was different, and he was a little bit dissatisfied with that. Also, the Vishnu form there, he would also sometimes even transform himself into a form of Krishna, like Krishna in his garden, and play with cowherd boys like that. Then he would come back to his other form again. So sometimes he would manifest a form similar to Krishna. And he sometimes he would invite Gopakumar to play his flute and dance, etc. for him. He was feeling a little bit dissatisfied because he wasn't exactly, even though the Lord was Krishna and they're non-different still, he couldn't appreciate that atmosphere in Vaikuntha Loka. Feelings of respect and reverence would arise in me, and that would block my pure love and leave my mind dissatisfied. So because he was there, then he would feel respect also, but then he didn't appreciate it that much. So some of them were criticizing Gopakumar, but then others had a broader understanding. So they said Krishna is so kind to his devotees that Sankirtan of any of his activities is glorious and beneficial and satisfying to our divine master. So he was doing kirtan, they were saying you have to recite these verses, but then others actually said, oh no, Vishnu also appreciates kirtan as well. So kirtan is for everyone. So they tried to encourage him there, even though others were discouraging him. Then Narada Muni came, and he gave instructions to him. So we see that Gopakumar, he had a guru who gave him the Diksha mantra, and then later on he gave him instructions, and through that he progressed all the way up to Vaikuntha. Here we see that Narada Muni is giving instructions, even though he's already got a spiritual body and whatever, still he's getting some shiksha. Narada is a shiksha guru. So he realized that Gopakumar was dissatisfied in spite of the fact that he was in Vaikuntha, which is very, very rare even for yogis. But he said, whoever comes to Vaikuntha realizes the very same service to the lotus feet of Krishna for which he had developed a taste by the end of his material life. And he realizes that service in full detail with suitable dress, form, and so on, since each mood of devotion is dear to Bhagavan and each gives pleasure to the devotee absorbed in it. So, somehow you can get satisfied with any of these forms, because within that form you can also realize the form that you worship. In Vaikuntha, each devotee sees the Supreme Lord Sri Narayan in the form of the particular Lord he worships with suitable complexion and other qualities. So even though you may be attached to another form of the Lord like Narasimhadev in Vaikuntha, if you worship Vishnu, you're also satisfied with that. Devotees not exclusively attracted to one form of the Lord, those whose affection is not focused on a single appearance of his, are ready to serve him in any form. So this describes a certain type of devotee who's not dedicated to one form. He likes everything, so he worships Narasimhadev, he worships Rama, he worships Varaha, and I agree, whatever like that. A little attraction for all of them. There are devotees like that, but it's explained elsewhere that this is actually not the highest form. it's a little bit weak. Huh? And in fact, when Rupa Goswami in Nectar Devotion describes Shantarasa, this is a type of Shantarasa, where you have different attraction for different rasas and different forms of the Lord. And similarly, in Vedanta Sutra, Baladev Vidyabhusan also describes that some devotees, they don't have devotion to one form, but they alternate with the devotion, even in perfection, between one form or the other. But that implies that they don't have very strong devotion channeled for one form. So it's a weaker form of devotion. But some persons prefer that. So, though there are many forms, he also describes that Krishna is different from Narayan, even though they're actually one. For when Krishna appears in his descent in the material world, he fully manifests the many unique glories that distinguish Krishna alone. Charming, attractive glories that can be known only to hearts softened by prema bhakti. So if you have a certain type of bhakti, then you can appreciate Krishna and the unique qualities of Krishna, which are described in Nectar Devotion. He has Madhurya Rupa, and Madhurya Leela, and Madhurya Bhaktas, and Madhurya Flute, Venu. So he has sweetness, but only certain types of devotees can appreciate that, and that they'll begin to worship Krishna. So here Narada Muni is actually glorifying Krishna. But the servants of the Lord's incarnations do the greatest happiness in the loving service. They prefer each according to his own mood. So even though we can say Krishna is the highest and gives the most bliss, still other devotees prefer other forms, and they're satisfied with that, and they get they experience prema. So no one can really disturb them in their relationship. According to the way one worships, the Lord awards different results. One who thus reaches the goal he has pursued never feels discontent. So all of these relationships are satisfying to the particular devotees, and that's why the Lord has so many different forms. But at the same time, Krishna is put on the top. By the mercy of prema, the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Controller, becomes subordinate to his devotees. This, in effect, deprives him of independence. For this reason, he rarely gives prema. So this, of course, is mentioned at the very beginning of the Nectar Devotion, where the 6 qualities of bhakti are described, and the last quality is Krishna Karshani. Krishna is attracted to bhakti and comes under control of the devotee in prema, even though he's the supreme independent. So therefore, he very rarely awards prema because he doesn't want to become dependent. The Lord's coming under the control of his dearmost servants creates no unhappiness or fault of any kind. Rather, it creates great joy and broadcasts such glorious qualities of the Lord as his affectionate concern for his devotees. So, coming under the control of his devotee is not a bad quality, because even though we say he should be independent, now he's becoming dependent. So in this case, it doesn't imply any criticism, because it manifests or it shows that the Lord is very affectionate, and affection is not a bad quality. And if he shows so much affection that he's controlled by his devotee, that's a good quality, not a bad quality. If he didn't show that affection, then he would be accused of indifference, and he's not responding properly to the great affection of his devotee. So then that would be a fault. So if he does respond to his devotee, it's a good quality. And then we have the ultimate type of prema, mahabhava. In prema bhakti, sometimes a unique treasure appears. Mahabhava, the highest stage of ecstasy. Discerning itself as the highest object, it dances exuberantly at the height of the greatest well of intense joy. And so Mahabhava is the topmost type of prema, and in that one experiences the highest bliss. And of course that Mahabhava is available or is experienced only by the gopis, and not even the queens of Dwarka can experience Mahabhava. They're one stage below that. They get Anuraga, and then above that is Mahabhava. And the peculiar nature of Mahabhava is that outwardly it shows signs of terrible distress, sorrow, and pain in separation, that is. And although these signs are but external, the Lord can never tolerate seeing such as they in his beloved devotees. So therefore the Lord responds to those devotees eventually, and he meets them again. So this was also described in the first part, in the whole story of Narada Muni. And then at the end, he describes this this whole high experience of love and separation. Because we find in Dwarka, Narada Muni comes to Dwarka, and then they tell him that the Yadus say, we're not the highest devotee. Uddhava is the highest devotee because he's always with Krishna. We never see him because he just goes back into his palaces with his queens, and Uddhava follows him. So Uddhava is the best devotee. But then he tries to find Uddhava, and Uddhava is waiting there along with the queens and Balaram, and they're waiting for Krishna to get up in the morning. But Krishna won't get up because he's dreaming of Vrindavan. And when he does wake up, then he's completely disturbed. So they have to pacify him by various things, and then he's wondering how he can pacify the people of Vrindavan. So that illustrates the the love and separation, and how the Krishna is miserable because the gopis and the people of Vrindavan are miserable in separation. He has to somehow pacify them. So it's explained that even though this looks like distress and sorrow and lamentation and pain, it is actually within prema itself. And within that separation even, they experience the highest bliss. So therefore it's not like pain in the material world or suffering in the material world. So that experience of separation is actually part of prema itself, and the highest expression of prema. So after explaining everything to Gopakumar, then he's in Vaikuntha and he's dissatisfied. Narada tells him to go to Ayodhya and Dwarka within Vaikuntha, within the spiritual world. And you see there the various moods that the devotees have there. And maybe you can be satisfied with those moods. So he goes to Ayodhya, in the spiritual world, and he sees Rama on his throne, etc. And he sees, oh, he's something like Narayan, he's also a little different. Because there's a little more intimacy there, in spite of the fact that he's showing off his powers and his wealth, etc. So, certain especially attractive features distinguish him from that Lord, that is from Vishnu. His hand was adorned with a bow, his glances were delightfully modest and humble. Playing the role of a perfect king, he talked of the prescribed rules of religious behavior. So he was representing Dharma, the ideal king in performing Dharma. And he was very modest, etc. So that was impressive, but then he said, I do not see the unique sweetness I had found within the very playful pastimes of my worshipable deity's lotus feet. That's Krishna. Nor did I find a special mercy. So he was satisfied because it was a little better than Rama, or than Vishnu, but it still wasn't up to the standard of Krishna. So then finally, Sri Rama, whose heart is tender with unlimited compassion, who knows the mind of everyone in the world, consoled me with words of gentle affection. Go to Dwarka and be happy, he ordered. And he sent me off at once together with the chief of the bears. So finally he's going to Dwarka. Okay, so the story continues, and he goes to Dwarka. So Dwarka was better because it was actually Krishna. And there he was also manifesting 2 arms, etc. And he was young in age. He saw Gopakumar. He said, is all well with you? Is your health good? I hope the place you came from is free from misfortune. And speaking in that way, began to feel disturbed. As Krishna began to feel disturbed because he sees that Gopakumar looks like a cowherd boy and he's in Dwarka. And then he starts getting, thinking of Vrindavan again. And then Uddhava had to calm him down. So the Yadus talked to Gopakumar, dear friend, you have come to this place which is more full in supreme splendor than even Vaikuntha, and you are now our companion. We think it hardly fitting that you continue to dress like a miserable forest dweller. So just like the people of Vaikuntha, they're kind of persecuting you, saying you don't fit in here. You've got the wrong dress. You should have, wonderful clothes like the Yadus, he looks like a miserable forest dweller. So they don't appreciate the mood of Vrindavan. So therefore he wasn't quite satisfied there also. So Narada comes again, and he began to explain many things, and of course Gopakumar was a little amazed because he's seeing that Narada Muni just pops up anywhere. So Narada Muni explains that, well, just as one Bhagavan Krishna exists in many forms in many places, so do we, his servants. So the servants can also just manifest himself anywhere and have many forms also, by the will of the Lord, whatever. Of course, Narada Muni is also special because he's a Shaktavesh avatar, so he has very special powers. All the Lord's personal associates are at his hand like playthings. They are always fully dedicated to his service. Each assumes a variety of forms, yet stays essentially one, just like the Lord himself. He expand in different universes when the Lord expands to serve him. Just see, Uddhava, this cowherd's son, born at Govardhan, is seeking something unachievable for persons like you and me. Greatly agitated, he wanders here and there, never anywhere transcending the painful distress that is fixed in his heart. So Narada Muni actually appeared when Gopakumar was in Dwarka, but he was staying with Uddhava. Because Uddhava was closer to Vrindavan than any of the Yadus, because he experienced the bliss of and the separation of the people of Vrindavan, and Krishna also gave him the message to give to the gopis, etc. So he was very sympathetic to the people of Vrindavan. He understood their mood. So Gopakumar was told to stay with him, and then Narada Muni came. So then Narada Muni is here speaking to Uddhava, and he's actually praising Gopakumar because in spite of seeing all these different spiritual forms of the Lord, he's not satisfied with those. And Narada Muni understands that, of course, the higher than that is the form of Krishna. And the devotees of Krishna are also higher. So he notices that Gopakumar is always dissatisfied with these other forms of the Lord, and that produces a pain in his heart. True devotee of Lord Gopal Dev, O son of a cowherd, far away from here lies the most exalted of all places called Goloka. It is full of all splendor and beyond the borders of all other regions, including Vaikuntha. So here we have that picture of the, here we have Goloka at the top, and we have Vaikuntha, and probably Ayodhya's up here, and then Dwarka's up here, and then finally we get Goloka at the very top. That same Goloka takes the form of divine Brajabhumi in the district of Mathura. So he's speaking about on earth. Goloka becomes, this Mathura area and Vraja. That abode can be reached only through the purest prema, similar to the prema of the residents of Vraja. So one has to have a very similar mood
of the people of Raja. And what is that mood? They don't see Krishna as God at all. So they're only impelled by their affection for the Lord as their son, or as their friend, or as their lover, in the different rasas. Whereas in Dwarka, the Yadu see Krishna as Supreme Lord. So it's a little bit different. So you can only get to Goloka if you have that type of love. So that love is called raga, and as devotees are called ragatmaka. They don't see Krishna as God, they just are impelled by their affection. And to follow after is called raganuga. One can never achieve such prema for the Lord by concentrating on his supreme power, because in that mood one invariably feels fear and reverence. So we see in Vrindavan that Mother Yasoda has no fear and reverence, rather she's trying to make Krishna afraid. And she ties him up and threatens him with a stick, etc. So that cannot take place in Dwarka or in Ayodhya or anywhere else, only in Vrindavan or in Goloka. In the land of Raja, any tree with any of its parts can fulfill all the desires of anyone who asks. Yet the Lord does not always display his powers in Vraja, because that might obstruct the enjoyment of his pastime. So there is powers there, and even the trees can give anything, but the Lord hides his powers there. And if he does display them, it gets covered up. The people there do not see that. If Krishna lifts Govardhan Hill, obviously it's a display of power. They don't recognize it at all, and they say that, Nanda and Balaram are actually holding up the hill. And when he kills demons, then they don't see how he kills them. So when Krishna kills Putana, they don't see that he sucked her life air out. They just say, somehow there's a big demon here, and she fell on the ground. That's all. Or when Trinavarta falls from the sky because Krishna's very heavy and he's holding on, they don't see that. All they see that Trinavarta suddenly collapsed and fell out of the sky, that's all. Or when he marches into Agasura, they don't see that he expanded his form and choked him. They just saw that suddenly he died and everyone comes out of his mouth. So often Krishna will just disguise how he kills them and how his powers are used, they don't see. And if they do see it, then even then it's somewhat covered up. So they see him dancing on Kaliya. But then again, they forget about it. So their prema is such that even if Krishna displays powers, they don't accept it. And that's the strength of their prema. No one can describe the glories of his beauty, but still I shall speak about them as far as I am able. His beauty amazes even him. Seeing him, the cows, birds, bushes, creepers, and trees all became ecstatic. So this is there's a whole description here, a very wonderful description. The beauties of are the very special attractions of Krishna, which make him unique, and that is, of course, then it's understandable why Gopal Kumar is not interested in the other forms of the Lord. And he has a whole section on the flute in the Nectar Devotion, when it describes the 64 qualities in Krishna. Then the 4 unique ones ends with the Madhurya Venu, the sweetness of Krishna's flute. That's the last thing described, how his flute is very unique. Sometimes we'll wonder, well, what's so special, just a flute, But then here we see there's a whole section here dedicated to the glories of Krishna's flute. The words of the Upanishads and other Vedic texts come forth from the Lord's own divine mouth, but simply by contact with his bimba-red lips, that wooden object, the all-enchanting little bamboo flute, has created a sound more nectarian than the words of the Vedas and any other form of speech. So that sound is not ordinary sound. And it, of course, it's very sweet, but also it contains the highest, most profound wisdom. Because the Upanishads are said to be the essence of the Vedas, and they contain the ultimate truth and the highest philosophical principles and philosophy, etc. But the sound of the flute is even higher than that. So it's sweet, but the most profound, giving the highest knowledge as well. Hearing the sound of the flute, all the devatas and perfected mystics flying in their airplanes were bewildered in divine love, and so were their wives. Indra, Shiva, Brahma, and the devatas were so confused they could no longer tell fact from illusion. So in other words, everyone gets bewildered by that sound of the flute. How bewildered? Bewildered of prema, sweet prema, the prema involving Krishna. So the devatas get bewildered. The great sages, their meditations breaking, felt transformations of ecstasy arising within themselves, and the motions of the moon and other planets, swift and unceasing, which strictly follow the whirling wheel of time, just stopped. So not only the devatas, but the great sages, many who are yogis and gyanis, also began to get ecstatic symptoms on hearing the flute. And the planets stopped moving because of the flute. Planets, of course, are also controlled by certain devatas. So the devatas got stunned and their planets would not move. Moving creatures became immobile. Inanimate beings moved. Conscious beings lost consciousness, and unconscious gained it. Constantly, indeed, these creatures and objects were submerged in a vast flood of prema rasa, overwhelmed by many transformations of ecstasy. So here we see all different creatures, the animals, not only human beings and devatas are affected, but animals were affected also. So the nature of the flute is that, and prema, that it everything turns into its opposite. So the moving creatures stop moving and they get stunned. And the inanimate beings, like the trees, begin to move around and they tremble and they start crying, etc. So they attain opposite symptoms of their normal state. Conscious beings lose consciousness, and unconscious things gain consciousness, like the river is unconscious, but the river, hearing the flute, is flowing and then it stops flowing and goes into whirlpools. Like that. Or the cloud in the sky stops moving suddenly. Or the rock begins to melt. So all this takes place simply by hearing the sound of the flute. So it induces ecstasies of prema, transformations in prema. So another special feature is, of course, the Ras Lila. Of course, all Leelas are special in Krishna, therefore one of the four qualities is Madhurya Lila. The pastimes of Krishna are most sweet. So among those pastimes of Krishna, the Ras Lila is considered to be one of the highest pastimes, and most spectacular, amazing pastimes. The Lord's Rasa dance discloses the most confidential secrets of his nature as Bhagavan. It embodies the perfection of everything most dear to him. It reveals the final limit of his supreme excellence and sweetness. The goddess Lakshmi couldn't enter that dance, even after aspiring to do so in hundreds of attempts. So the devotees of Vishnu up to Lakshmi cannot enter into that Ras Lila. It requires that certain mood that's available in Vrindavan only, and as well as that, it's only available if one has a certain mood in Vrindavan, that of a gopi. They're the only ones that can enter into the Ras Lila. The Lord's cleverness in expertly arranging the gopis in a circle, his expertise in arts like dance and song, the perfections of splendor, one after another, that were never seen before. Those wonders steal away my heart and enchant the entire world. So this again is describing the rasa dance, which Krishna actually performed every night when he reached Kaishore age, until he left Vrindavan. So he displays all sorts of expertise, dancing, singing, and joking, etc., in relation to the gopis. So Krishna is very remarkable And the people of Vraja are also most remarkable. In their pure love, they know the Lord only as the young son of Nanda Gopa. And though fully blessed with that love, they spend all their time in great distress because of separation from Him. His behavior, disappearing, is suitable for giving the highest prema, the most secret object, which should be given to the people of Vraja, since by separation the highest prema manifests. So, the separation may be temporary, as in Bhagavatam it describes how he separated himself in the Rasa Lila, and he's separated from the Nanda and Yasoda in the morning when he goes out to herd the cows. So we have temporary separations, and even that is enough to cause great agony in separation from all the various devotees, not only the gopis, but from the mother and fathers and the elders and the sakas as well. They get feelings of separation at certain times of the day. And through that, by his separation, then higher levels of prema are reached in separation. Intense levels of love are there. And of course, in his earthly pastimes, he also separates for a prolonged period when he goes to Mathura. Later on, it describes that even in the spiritual world, he goes away to Mathura, but then he comes back again. And then he goes away again, and he comes back, but they don't remember the previous incident. So there is separation, prolonged separation in the spiritual world also. So Narada Muni talks about why Krishna is so rare to attain. One reason is that the number of scriptures about Krishna is not so many. And in terms of scripture, more about artha and kama, how to get your material desires fulfilled, because that's what most of the people want. So there's many scriptures telling how you can fulfill your material desires. Then we have some scriptures on dharma, how to restrict your desires. And if you want your artha and kama, you have to do it under restriction. So the number of dharma scriptures are less than those on artha and kama. Moksha is higher than dharma, but there are less scriptures about that because the number of people qualified to go for moksha is less, and the number of people interested in moksha is less. So we have less scriptures about liberation. There's less scriptures on bhakti than liberation because the number of people who have faith is much less. And the number of scriptures concerning prema for Krishna are very few. This is the most secret form of the Lord, most confidential form of the Lord. So very few people can understand it. So there are fewer scriptures about Krishna. So therefore, and how to attain that realization of Krishna, therefore, is not very common. It's also quite rare. And in the scriptures, we don't see too much about that. So it's difficult. Bhakti is difficult in the sense we don't have so many scriptures explaining it. And bhakti for Krishna is even rarer. So there are fewer scriptures describing how to attain Krishna through bhakti. So therefore we have all sorts of scriptures, but the scriptures on Krishna are the rarest. There's a whole section then on not just Krishna but the gopis, glorification of the gopis. So there are quotations from Uddhava, mainly from Bhagavatam, how he glorifies the gopis and how Akrura glorifies the gopis. Even though Akrura is, he's kind of like the enemy because he takes Krishna away. But he makes statements glorifying the gopis' love also. And even though he takes Krishna away from them and they curse him. There is glorification of the gopis by Bhishma Dev, you see in the Bhagavatam. And by the women of Hastinapur, they also glorify the gopis. So it's a lot of glorification of the gopis, and that's given here in the brief So how do we attain Vraja? Mercy. We have to attain prema, following after the people of Vraja through mercy. The prime cause of Vraja prema is Krishna's full mercy, which in someone may arise spontaneously and someone else by gradual practice of devotional service. For this, one must have a strong desire to serve the Lord in the manner of his gopas and gopis. So you have to have that lobha, that greed for Krishna in Vrindavan, and then follow after the people in Vrindavan. Oh, of course, spontaneously, if you're so fortunate, spontaneously that can arise, or you practice it gradually as a sadhana, and that becomes Raganuga Bhakti. And here we see that there's an emphasis upon kirtan also. One develops that love by practicing devotional service whose main ways are meditation on and singing about the many Vraja pastimes of the Lord. That service becomes brilliant by sankirtan of the Lord's holy names and glorification of his devotees in the company of people whose only taste is for devotional service and pure love. That love appears of its own accord. So, thinking of Vrindavan and the pastimes of Vrindavan, seeing of the glories of Vrindavan and the pastimes, doing sankirtan of the Lord's holy names, and glorifying his devotees, and associating with those devotees. So these are the ways in which you can realize Krishna in Vrindavan. And living in the holy Dham. When one resides always in seclusion in the land of the Lord's favorite pastime forest, surely such love will soon develop and mature. So there's an emphasis also on living in the Dham. Then Narada Muni talks about dainya, which is utter humility and feeling oneself the most fallen. That loving devotional service is far different from disciplines such as karma, jnana, and yoga. At every stage it is decorated by indifference to them, and its root is dainya, utter humility. So within bhakti there's always a sense of being the most fallen. Wise men define dainya as the state in which one always thinks oneself exceptionally incapable and low, even when endowed with all excellences. So the devotees are, in their sadhana even, have to somehow have the state of being exceptionally low. And we see in the Shishastaka also, what is Trinada Pisuni Chinator, one should be lower than the straw in the street. So this is an indication again that dainya, even at the beginning of bhakti, we have to have that utter humility in approach to the Lord, in approach to bhakti, and to other devotees, and to other living entities. And then the higher we get in bhakti, when we get to the prema, and prema reaches its height, and then that dainya or humility also reaches the strongest point. In other words, the higher you go in bhakti, the more miserable you feel, the more low you feel. You feel the lowest of the low, most unqualified. Huh? And the gopis, the women of Gokul, separated from Krishna, feel the most unqualified. So the highest stage of Madhurya Rasa in Vipralambha, in that state, then the gopis experience the greatest dainya, the most, they feel themselves the most unqualified and the most miserable. When dainya fully matures, prema unfolds without limit. And so we see dainya and prema acting in a relationship in which each is both cause and effect. The dainya causes prema and the prema causes dainya in very, very high levels. Without prema, the 9 kinds of devotional service like vegetables without salt. So in other words, we don't get prema, then our bhakti is kind of tasteless. An elaborate meal without hunger, scriptural study without understanding, or garden without fruit. So in other words, if we're doing bhakti, then we should attain prema. it's not complete unless we have that prema. That gives the final taste to it. Even if you meet the divine goddess Radhika, then you will see prema in person. If ever you meet the divine goddess Radhika, then you will see prema in person. So she's the highest type of prema of all. And if ever she speaks about prema, only then can you hear the truth about it, if you are able to understand it. So she is the one that can ultimately explain the experience of prema. And that's also the reason why Krishna himself took the mood of Radha as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to explain the gopis' love and Radha's love to the people in Kali Yuga. Because only if you have Radha's mood, then you could explain what that type of Madhurya Rasa is, and that experience of love. So he takes the mood of Radha and manifests himself in Kali Yuga. Even when you came to Sri Vaikuntha, the Lord's abode of limitless, incomparable joy, and to his transcendental city of Ayodhya, and to this city of Dwarka, even greater than both, your heart's distress only multiplied, though it should not have, since you're in the spiritual world, and even you're meeting Krishna. On Svarga and other material planets with ignorance of higher realms, even though seeing the Lord's lotus feet, you became unhappy. So now quickly go to Vrajabhumi of Mathura district, which enhances the fame and splendor of the earth. Go fulfill the desire you have held for so long. So again, he's told to go back into the material world. I think a third time. So this is Narada Muni's advice. Okay. I think this is probably the last chapter. So following Narada's instructions, here in Vraja, I went to see the many places of Sri Krishna's pastimes. I sang his names most dear to him. I sang about his pastimes loudly and sweetly. I focused my mind upon them. So that was the instruction. You should meditate on the Lord's pastimes. You should glorify the Lord's pastimes. You should stay in Vrindavan. You should chant the Lord's names, etc. Then the crest jewel of all who are merciful appeared before me. That's Krishna appeared with his own lotus hand, a hand cool like nectar and always pleasing to hold his food. But he wiped the dust from my limbs. So Krishna himself was serving Gopal Kumar by taking the dust off his limbs. So he actually very quickly he realized Krishna in Vraja. Fainting. Then I saw myself being transported to another place. Along some wonderful path by a vehicle flying faster than the mind and higher than one could imagine. I was amazed to see I was passing through Vaikuntha Loka and going beyond. I watched with great delight as I passed Ayodhya and other realms. So again, he goes out of the material world and goes back up to the highest point of all, goes beyond Ayodhya and Dwarka, etc. And he arrives at Goloka. Collecting my wits, I was amazed to see I was passing through Vaikuntha Loka, going beyond. I watched with great delight as I passed Ayodhya and other realms. I arrived at the shining world above all others, Sri Goloka, which I had long aspired to reach. Everything there appeared the same as in this divine Mathura Mandala of the material world, so it was very, very similar. So it describes how he's wandering around there and he sees people doing various activities, and then finally he sees Krishna. Then from a distance I saw him, his charming flute in hand. Running quickly, he emerged from among his friends and animals and approached me, saying in a sweet voice, "Look, Sridhama, here's my dear friend Sarupa, the sun who shines on the lotus of your family." So he's a relative of Sridhama in this pastime. And here Krishna gives him his name, Sarupa. Actually, Gopal Kumar never got a name from his guru. His Diksha, he got the mantra from his guru. He didn't get any name. He was a cowherd boy, that's all. But now he gets a name by Krishna himself, so he calls him Sarupa. So Krishna was very, very pleased to see him. So there's a whole description of how Sarupa goes back with Krishna to the house of Nanda Maharaj, and then the gopis bathe Krishna. He takes his meal with Sarupa, his see here, Sarupa sitting here, that's Krishna and Balaram. And then it describes how Krishna goes to sleep at night, and then when no one's looking, he goes out for Rasalila. Then he comes back in the morning before anyone sees him. And then he eats and he goes to the forest. So then, of course, Sarupa cannot go to the Rasalila or anything, so then it describes the morning where Krishna eats, and then he goes to the forest, etc. And there's a whole description of all the food and everything when they're eating at supper and the dinner time, you know, all the food's presented and whatever. And there's a whole description of how they go to the fields, and there's millions and millions of cowherds, the children, young people, and elders. And each thinks, I'm alone, dear to Krishna, even though Krishna actually is with everybody. And they don't see that, so they all think Krishna's with me. Just as the pure way they behave towards Krishna always confirms this ecstatic mentality, so does the way he behaves towards every one of them. So in response to their love, Krishna responds in the most pleasing way that satisfies them. Yeah, even though there are millions of them. And so he satisfies each one, and they never feel that, you know, they're neglected or alone, or they can't approach him. He's with every one of them. Though Krishna's affection to everyone, then still the gopis are singled out. It's towards each of the gopis in the millions and millions that Krishna always clearly shows the greatest attachment, compassion, and love. That's from an external point of view. If we're within the pastimes, nobody notices that. But if you look outside, then you see that actually Krishna's got the most attraction to the gopis. And when Krishna shows special love for one of the gopis, it then becomes apparent that she is the dearest to him. So it looks like that gopi is the dearest, even though you know that Radha is the dearest. But then Krishna shows affection for one gopi, then it looks like he's most attracted to that gopi. All the gopis constantly experience the pleasure of Krishna's never-ending chain of pastimes suitable for the highest prema. Yet none of the gopis ever imagine that she is the dearest. In other words, they have the greatest dainya. So each of them thinks, oh, when will I be fortunate enough to become even the lowest maidservant of Krishna? So they never think of they never become proud of being the best. They think of themselves as the most fallen. Though the inhabitants of Vaikuntha are not satiated with their bliss in worshipping the lotus feet of the Lord, since that is the nature of bhakti, they are different from the inhabitants of Goloka. Since they think the great mercy of the Lord who possesses the highest Shakti exists equally for them all, and that each one receives that mercy. So in Vaikuntha they think of the Lord being Sama, he is equal to everybody. But it's a little bit different in Goloka. We see this varieties and intensity. So then there's a description of what Gopal Kumar sees there. Now Sarupa is his name now, and he sees different pastimes going on, including killing of demons there. So actually there seems to be demons there. They're not real demons. I guess they're Yogamaya demons or something like that. But we get these different events like taming Kaliya or Keshi or Istasura, and Akura taking Krishna to Mathura even. These occur, and then they occur again later on, and later on again. So they repeat themselves. But the people forget it, and so it's new each time it happens. If the Brajabasis ever remember that suffering, they would bitterly lament and cry in fear, what a horrible, unheard of thing I saw in my dream. So they think it was a dream more than anything else if they recollect anything at all. So by the Yogamaya potency of Krishna, everything seems new to them whenever this happens. Now thus Krishna again and again goes to Kamsa city as he did many times before, and again returns to Sparta and Vraja. And thus the powerful force of their love ever increasingly grows both in union and in separation. So there's constantly coming and going, and their love keeps increasing each time. The most glorious thing is that the foremost of enlightened persons, the Lord himself, while drowning in an ocean of love for his dear devotees, cannot always remember what he has done and what he's going to do. So even Krishna forgets. And everything becomes new to him also. So, After, now this is, of course, now Gopakumar is Sarupa, and he's completely satisfied because Krishna is with him. He has a realization of Krishna. After staying for some time in Goloka, I realized this splendid Mathura Mandala here in the mortal world is not different. I reside therefore sometimes here and sometimes there. No longer do I perceive any difference between these two abodes. And we remember that actually Gopakumar is telling this story to the Brahmana in the material world. So he actually is, he came down to Vrindavan just for that Brahmana actually. Neither my sight nor my hearing nor even my mind ever touches any other abode than these two. So he goes back and forth between spiritual world and material world of Vrindavan, but they're all both the same actually. Oh, this is the last chapter. Okay, bliss of the worlds. So then he concludes a story here, and he describes how he met Radha in the forest. And Radha says, Sarupa, a Brahmana from Mathura who is my devotee, is coming to my grove. Go there alone, the first thing today. Enlighten with good instructions, console him, and help him quickly attain Krishna's grace. So actually it was the arrangement of Radha that the Brahmana got the mantra and then came to Vrindavan. On her instruction, I swiftly came here, overjoyed, without even a thought about missing the enjoyment of Krishna's company. So he got the instruction from Radha directly to meet the Brahmana. When Sarupa saw the Brahmana, even after spoken to in this way, when he saw that the Brahmana, even after he'd taught him everything, had not awakened to the treasure of pure love, Sarupa put his hand on the Brahmana's head. By the mercy of the great soul Sarupa, everything Sarupa had experienced became manifest at once in the Brahmana's heart, as if the Brahmana had experienced himself. So he heard the story, but still nothing happened. So Sarupa put his hand on his head, and then he had a realization of everything at that point. So this way the Brahmana got his realization, and then he was able to see Krishna. So then they saw Gopal Dev, his body beautifully dark, encircled by a brilliant effulgence. The Lord, compelled by his love for his dear devotees, ran towards them, and when he reached them, he fainted and fell on top of them, embracing with both his long, mighty arms. So he's meeting two people now, Sarupa plus the Brahmana, who's a new member of the community. Only by your influence are my family and I well. By your mercy, my heart is attracted to you. I've always looked towards the path by which you would come. Lord Krishna, that crest jewel of 7 persons, was distressed because he couldn't find anything better than himself to offer as a gift. So he removed the ornaments from his own body and decorated the Brahmana with them, making him look like Sarupa. So he gave his own ornaments away. Krishna rested a while on an excellent bed made of new soft leaves, sprouts, and flowers. The body was dear friend Sri Dhamma provided a comfortable pillow, and countless friends served Krishna by expertly reciting prayers, singing sweetly, fanning him, dressing his hair, and massaging his lotus feet and hands. And in the evening, Krishna, the giver of joy to all Vraja, left the newcomer Brahmana Jana Sharma, that's his name now, in the hands of Sarupa, and as before took pleasure in entering the cowherd village. So that more or less ends the whole story. So now we come to the conclusion. Parikshit has told this story to his mother because his mother's asked what happens to the people of Vraja. So actually they're eternally the Lord's with the Lord, and this place is actually equivalent to Goloka, the highest planet. So they're the highest devotees in Goloka, but they manifest themselves in the material world in Vrindavan. So they don't go anywhere actually, they're always in the eternal state of the highest planet. So he gives instruction to his mother. By your endeavors, dear mother, please try to reach Sri Goloka, the deep ocean where the flood of all transcendental bliss finds its ultimate limit. Just by going there, you will eternally relish all sorts of most sweet loving exchanges with that same Supreme Lord. Only a rare person achieves perfection when he has obtained full mercy from the Lord's dear devotees. O Mother, please therefore gather dust from the feet of devotees who have exclusive love for the lotus feet of the Lord. So he tells her you have to attain this highest abode of the Lord, and that's where you'll experience the sweetest and greatest bliss. And to do that, you have to take association of the devotees of the Lord. That world, Goloka, can be achieved only by firm, boundless love for the blessed feet of the lover of the gopis. In that land, one reaps the most valuable rewards far beyond one's desires. So that's actually the conclusion. So there's a long section. It goes on for pages and pages and pages and pages. And it's actually quotations from different scriptures glorifying Goloka. The whole second part is called, the glories of Goloka. That's the highest place. So then it ends with scriptural references about Goloka. And he starts with a quote from Harivamsa, which is an appendix to the Mahabharata. And that describes above Vaikuntha, there's another place called Goloka. Above Vaikuntha is the planet of the cows, which is protected by the Sadyas. O Krishna, that planet is infinitely expansive, pervading the unlimited spiritual sky. That planet is above all others, and there you'll be achieved by intense concentration of the heart. And then Jaimini quotes some verses. He quotes from Brahma Samhita. I worship the Supreme Lord Govinda, who, though regarding all the inhabitants as his very self, resides in Goloka exclusively with the young gopis, or the embodiments of Madhura Rasa. He accepts them as his wives, while they respond to his conjugal affection reciprocally. Quote from the Bhagavatam. How greatly fortunate are Nanda Maharaj, the cowherd man, and all the other inhabitants of Rajabhumi. There's no limit to their good fortune, because Krishna gave them prema, which is the highest bliss, eternal and complete. And then there's glorification of Radha. Glorification by her glorifying the flute. Dear gopis, what auspicious activities must the flute have performed to enjoy the nectar of Damodar's lips independently and leave only a taste for us gopis, for whom that nectar is actually meant. So this is attributed to Radha and her envy of the flute. The rivers have their hair standing on end, and its relatives, the trees, shed tears of pleasure, just as forefathers shed tears of joy on seeing the good fortune of their descendants. So the trees and the bamboo, etc., are the relatives of the flute, so they are in ecstasy seeing that the flute is intimately associating with Krishna. And it ends with a summary of Krishna's pastimes in the Bhagavatam, with this verse which occurs near the very, very end of the 10th canto, in the last chapter of the 10th canto. Krishna shines eternally as the ultimate resort of all living entities, and is also known as the son of Devaki and Yasoda. He is the guide of the Yadu dynasty, and with his mighty arms he kills everything inauspicious as well as every man who is impious. By his presence he destroys all things inauspicious for all living entities, moving and inert. His blissful smiling face, it always increases the desires of the gopis of Vrindavan and the women of Dwarka. So this was the story of Parikshit was there, and then talking to his mother, and that was a story told by Jaimini to Janamajaya, actually. So then Janamajaya speaks at the end. I am all successful. I'm all successful for you, O Lord, O spiritual master, have given me the opportunity to relish the secret glories of Goloka. And then Jaimini concludes, my dear boy, what you say is true. Anyone who hears or chants or meditates upon this narrative with devotion will achieve the abode of the Supreme. In other words, he gets to Goloka. Okay? So that concludes the Ray Bhagavatamrita. Any question? So we see there is, besides always the emphasis upon Goloka and then ultimately upon Radha, Krishna, and Gopis, and Madhurya Rasa, and Raga Bhakti, was also an emphasis on Kirtan as the highest process. As in the first part also, Narada Muni also emphasized that Kirtan is the method of attaining the highest realization.
So, anyone who comes to the path of bhakti, is it because Srimati Radhika sends someone?
Well, this is special, obviously. May not be Radhika. This is especially to get that Vrindavan prema. Now, of course, there's devotees in other sampradayas, and we have Vishnu prema or whatever. So, and then it would be we would say Lakshmi's maybe. But anyway, at the same time, bhakti actually is the Shakti of the Lord, and it's also feminine. And ultimately, the supreme devotee is Radha, so somehow there's a connection there no matter what, even if it's not directly Radha, we could say by her influence then. We get bhakti, and of course in the Hare Krishna mantra we're applying to Radha to get her mercy, to get Krishna's mercy, so again, there's a role for Radha in this as well. And even we see that Radha is involved here, but Jana Sharma, the Brahmana, and Gopal Kumar, they're not in Madhurya Rasa. They're in Sakya Rasa. But still, Radha's involved in those pastimes also, and making the devotees or whatever. So there's an interesting relationship here, even though it's a glorification of Madhurya Rasa ultimately. The whole story involves somebody in Sakya Rasa.
We're hearing about these various moods, like the pain of separation and so forth, in terms of the highest expression of their intense love for Krishna, and that's actually pleasure. And we hear that this is kind of well beyond the material understanding. At the same time, for us as conditioned souls to kind of grasp or have any kind of thing to compare it with. There's nothing to compare it with, but is there, like we hear, that there's perverted reflections within the material world which are things that ultimately originate from the spiritual realm? How to understand these things? Is it, how are we supposed to project our limited intelligence to grasp these?
Yeah, well, I think by similarity, that's all.
Right.
Huh? Even very simple things like the beauty of Krishna, how can we describe or understand that? So we're giving examples. Krishna's got a moon-like face, or his eyes are so-and-so like lotus petals or whatever. But obviously it's a spiritual lotus petal, a spiritual moon, which we have no conception of. But by analogy, then we can think of the beauty of the material moon and the material lotus petal, and it gives us some idea. It's not complete or not perfect, but it's gives us a little bit of an idea of the beauty of Krishna, even if we recollect, material objects in our mind or whatever. It's not perfect, but it's some sort of thing.
So the emotions that we might experience in hearing these pastimes, are they real? Are they relevant to?
Well, we can say at this point it's not the highest, rasa or whatever, but it at least is sympathetic to that. So just like the holy name itself, we don't experience everything. We don't realize Krishna in the chanting or the leelas, but still, it's not material. It's spiritual, and we're getting a spiritual effect from it. So the same way we hear the pastime, so it's not fully spiritual, but at least we're getting some influence of that spiritual thing on our sadhana and our heart.
and it's beneficial for us and leads us in the right direction. So the nature of the pastimes and the name as such are absolute. We cannot fully realize them at the moment and get the pure bliss out of it, but still it affects us, so it leads us towards that bliss ultimately. And the rasas, they do have a counterpoint to the material rasas. And in fact, if you look at the material works on rasa, they're written by Bharat Muni and others, and they have the same descriptions of the components of rasa, like Anubhava, Vibhava, Sattva Bhava, Vairacharya Bhava, etc. And many of the rasas got the same names, like Bhayanak rasa, Pir rasa, or Vira rasa, or Hasya rasa, Kamat rasa, etc. And Madhurya rasa, Shringara rasa, the love rasa is there. It's not complete. They don't have Sakya rasa, Vasaya rasa, maybe not Dasa so much, but they got Shanta and Madhurya rasa as the positive rasas. So it's not complete, but there's some sort of analogy there also, of rasas and the components, etc. But then, of course, the object is different because it's not Krishna, it's not the object of love, it's some material person, and therefore material emotions are evoked, whereas with Krishna it's spiritual emotions. But there's some similarity there. So we can somehow, by observing the material world, we can somehow understand something about the spiritual world, not completely, but some pattern at least. So in the material world also we have love and we have separation, and that's there even in like the dramas. In the material dramas we have a portrayal of, it's not, there's no interest in one sense, but just love, 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 love. So they have to have some obstacle. Somebody dies, somebody disappears, somebody rejects somebody, and then there's a big disturbance, and then finally they get together again. So that, that's the material rasa. It's similar, like that. So there's some, action, there's some suspense, there's some disturbance, and then there's a resolution finally. So that's what happens in the spiritual world also, on a higher level. And so that creates a taste also, a different taste, an excitement and a taste within the rasa.
So when we hear that like Krishna meets and is stunned when he meets Gopakumar like that, and the unconscious and whole thing.
Yeah, he faints.
He faints, and there's this kind of sense that actually this is what my heart's hankering for, that kind of reciprocation and exchange.
Yeah.
So is that
So that's actually a reflection of our spiritual desire, that we're aiming for that. Just as Gopakumar, he wasn't perfected at one stage, but he was looking for this relationship, and he wasn't satisfied with anything else. And of course, finally, he got a spiritual body and everything, and then he was really dissatisfied with those other forms. But it started with his, he was chanting that mantra, and he developed that urge for that type of relationship with Krishna, not with anyone else. And that was at sadhana stage, it got fixed in his heart.
Maharaj, we have talked about Mathura Mandala. Is there like a gradation from Vrindavan to Mathura? Is there a difference in the?
Well, in the Nectar Devotion, you'll find that it describes how, Mathura Mandala is superior to Vaikuntha, etc. But then within Mathura Mandala, then the area of Vrindavan is greater. Within that, the Govardhan is greater. Within that, then the Radha Kund is greater. Like that, because that's where Krishna and Radha have the most intimate pastimes, like that. So, yeah, there is a gradation there, even within the Mathura Mandala. It's a greater, and finally we get to Radha Kund in the middle, the highest point.
But Goloka includes Mathura.
It's identical in one sense, yeah, it's the same thing.
Sarupa, after going back and forth, spiritual world, material world, and he suddenly realized there's no difference.
Yeah, no difference, he realized
Can you
that.
elaborate on that? Is it a full range of spiritual world and full? What you say is different? There is no difference.
Well, we think Goloka,
yeah.
Goloka and Raja in the material world, there was
In the material world,
actually
there's no
the same.
difference.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, he was
What
satisfied either way, because Krishna's Like you see, Sarupa, the Brahmana was there, and Sarupa was there, and then Radha appears within the material world, and then finally the Brahmana gets his realization, and then Krishna appears, and then they all go into the fields together and play with the cows, and that's in the material Vrindavan, within the material world. So it's just it's equivalent.
So it doesn't matter where you are, as
Yeah,
long as your consciousness is
yeah.
right.
As long as you have prema, then you're with Krishna.
You just
In this Vrindavan or that Vrindavan, you're either
it's
place.
still there.
Yeah.
So in other words, it is just one continuum.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like we think in terms of material dimensions, higher
Yeah,
or
we,
lower.
we think
This
there's a
is far,
junction.
that is
There's
low.
yeah.
But actually, it's
But it is just one. It's
Yeah.
just one.
it's just another form of the same thing.
Yeah, it's just like whether you're in the sun or in the darkness, but it's just
Yeah.
one range of it.
Yeah.
But it's the same. It just depends on your consciousness.
Oh, yeah.
What's that mantra that Gopoi was chanting?
Gopijana Vallabhaya Swaha, which is half of our Diksha mantra for Krishna. We got an 18-syllable one, he got a 10-syllable one. So it's a Krishna mantra. And that mantra, that's not for kirtan. You chant it silently, that's your Diksha mantra. So he started out with that, but then later on he's glorifying kirtan is even more powerful. So that was, of course, traditional, that like in India, generally the sampradayas go through Diksha, and they get Diksha mantras, which are secret mantras. They don't have the process of kirtan. So when Lord Chaitanya came, then he emphasized kirtan over mantras. So generally people would chant the mantras and do deity worship with those mantras, and use those mantras for japa. And that was their sadhana. But it was all like secret, you couldn't tell anybody those mantras. When Lord Chaitanya came, then he said, well, Nam Sankirtan is the process. And therefore, that's loud. Everybody can hear the name. So you can do it congregationally, whatever. So it's easier for people in general to get access to spiritual practice through Nam Sankirtan. And of course, he's saying here that it's actually more powerful. But he started out with, Gopal Kumar started out with the regular conventional mantras. So, of course, Lord Chaitanya also got Diksha. So he also got mantra. He got 18-syllable mantra. I think it was 18. It doesn't say how many mantras. Gopal mantra. We got 18-syllable mantra. So it's Krishna mantra from his guru. So he got Diksha also. But then he started doing kirtan, which he also must have got from his guru. He must have instructed him in kirtan also. And then he emphasized that more than the process of Diksha, chanting the Diksha mantras.
So you were just mentioning Sankirtan, Lord Chaitanya infused it. So that means it was not really an arrangement or an adjustment for Kali Yuga. See, even in the Goloka, what's constantly happening is Sankirtan.
Yeah, it's there and it's in the scriptures also, but it wasn't revealed as the process for the Yuga. It became the Yuga Dharma for Kali Yuga, whereas, Treta Yuga was, Yagyas, and Dwapara Yuga was deity worship. So it became the Yuga Dharma in this age. But of course, the other thing is, it's Krishna's name now, and Radha's name also. So that's the very special thing with Lord Chaitanya. In other Kali Yuga, this is Nama, maybe Vishnu's name.
Do many devotees actually, our devotees in ISKCON and Gaudiya and the devotees in the world, do many actually attain prema? Or is it like a kind of quite a long term?
Generally, it's a long-term thing. It takes many lifetimes to get, and it's very rare. And usually if you attain prema, then nobody knows about it, because those devotees hide. They're not the preachers. The prema bhakta sees everybody as a devotee, so he sees no necessity of preaching. And he's simply absorbed in trance, in Krishna Leela. So generally not a preacher. Sometimes, of course, they become preachers, like Narada Muni's preaching. So it's also there, but generally they tend to hide themselves. They're not the preachers. So the main preachers are usually the Madhyam Bhaktas.
Can they also have premada? Can those madhyama?
Yeah, well, you go from Madhyama to Uttama, and then you get prema. So everybody can progress upwards, definitely, but it's the Madhyamas who are doing most of the preaching. So they're the most obvious people in the material world. They're very active, whereas the Uttamas and the Prem Bhaktas are usually hidden someplace and not very public. Okay. Hare Krishna.
His Holiness Mani Swami Maharaj ki. Everybody please join.